It was quiet. Too quiet. Scientists had long called it sleeping, but now strange rumblings shake the ground. Smoke curls into the sky. Animals flee. Rivers boil. People living nearby whisper of earthquakes that seem to come from the earth itself. Could this giant volcano, thought to be safe for hundreds of years, be waking up again? And if it does, what could happen next? Stay with us, because what you're about to see is not just a warning. It might be the first sign of a disaster no one saw coming. The sky over the northwest was calm. Birds flew over rivers. Deer grazed in the valleys. Nothing seemed wrong. But deep underground, something stirred. Small earthquakes began. People in nearby towns noticed doors that rattled for no reason. Dogs barked at empty corners. Farmers reported water in wells that looked cloudy. Scientists scratched their heads. This volcano, called Yellowstone, had slept for hundreds of years. No one had expected it to wake. The first radar warning came from a small research station. Machines that measure ground movement showed strange bulges in the earth. A hill had formed near the center of the caldera. It grew slowly, almost unnoticed, but steadily. Dr. Emily Hayes, a geologist, looked at the data. Her hands shook. "This isn't normal," she whispered to herself. Her team tried to remain calm, but the numbers were terrifying. Ground beneath Yellowstone was rising at a speed they had never seen before. Then the gas readings came in. Sulfur, carbon dioxide, strange mixes of chemicals no one expected. The air around the park had a new smell. People reported headaches. Pets hid in corners. Birds flew away. Even tourists noticed the change, but most thought it was just a strange smell from the hot springs. News spread slowly at first. Social media posts showed steaming vents, muddy rivers, and unusual tremors. But scientists knew this was only the beginning. They had charts. They had data. And those charts screamed danger. The public, however, didn't understand. "It's just another earthquake," some said. "Volcanoes sleep, don't they?" But Dr. Hayes and her team knew better. Yellowstone had erupted before, and when it did, the effects were global. Late at night, the first small explosions shook the ground. Steam shot into the air. Trees swayed violently. In a remote cabin, a man caught the noise on camera, a strange rumble, followed by a low, vibrating growl. He posted it online, but most people ignored it. Deep underground, the magma chamber swelled. Scientists could see it in thermal imaging. Colors glowed red and orange beneath miles of rock. It was alive. And it was hungry. No one could predict exactly when it would erupt. Maybe months. Maybe years. But the signs were clear. Something massive was forming, something that could change the land and sky forever. Dr. Hayes stood on a ridge, looking at the rising smoke. Her mind raced. "We need to warn them, everyone," she said, but even she didn't know how the world would react. The earth beneath Yellowstone groaned. And in that groan, the first whispers of a disaster traveled. The ground beneath Yellowstone shifted in silence, almost secretly. To the casual visitor, the valley looked peaceful. Elk grazed in the fields. Rivers flowed calmly. Steam drifted lazily from hot springs. But beneath the surface, a different world throbbed with heat and pressure. Deep underground, the magma chamber stretched like a hidden ocean. Red-orange light pulsed through cracks in the rock. Scientists monitoring the area knew every vibration, every change in temperature, every strange chemical reading. And they were terrified. Dr. Emily Hayes sat in front of her screens, watching the graphs climb higher and higher. Each number told a story of growing danger. "It's expanding faster than we expected," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her assistant, Mark, leaned closer. "Do you mean, it could erupt soon?" he asked. Dr. Hayes did not answer. She only stared at the glowing red shapes on the thermal imaging display. Something was moving. The magma chamber was not just swelling, it was shifting. Like a living beast, it pushed against the earth above it. Scientists called it inflation. The ground bulged slowly, then faster. Forests in the park started showing small cracks. Trees tilted slightly. Streams changed direction. Small geysers erupted unexpectedly. Animals were the first to sense the danger. Wolves left their dens. Bears roamed into the mountains. Birds flew in large, frantic flocks. Tourists reported strange animal behavior. Some thought it was weather or human interference, but it was something much older and more dangerous. The gas readings were worse. Carbon dioxide levels rose sharply in areas that had been safe for decades. Sulfur fumes made the air smell like rotten eggs. Scientists wore masks as they moved around the park. Some workers began to feel dizzy. Some experienced headaches that would not go away. "It's like the Earth itself is sick," one geologist said, staring at the bubbling mud pools. Even stranger were the tremors. Small earthquakes had begun weeks ago. Now, they were becoming rhythmic, almost deliberate. The ground would shake for a few seconds, stop, then shake again. Scientists were puzzled. This pattern had never been recorded before. "It's communicating," Dr. Hayes muttered. "Something deep below is warning us." No one knew exactly what it meant. Was it a minor eruption starting? Or was the volcano preparing for a massive, catastrophic explosion? The thought haunted every geologist in the room. Yellowstone had erupted before, hundreds of thousands of years ago, covering much of the United States in ash. Another eruption of that size could change the world. Mark checked the satellite images. Smoke rose in thin lines from unusual spots in the park. The geysers behaved erratically. One geyser had erupted higher than ever, sending water 50 feet into the air. Trees near the edges of the park showed burned leaves, even though no fire had occurred. Nature itself was changing. Outside, clouds gathered unusually fast. The sky darkened even though it was still morning. Tourists took pictures, but they laughed nervously. "It's just weather," they said. But the scientists knew it was more than that. The atmosphere was reacting to the heat underground. Tiny ash particles were already drifting upward. In the labs, the team worked tirelessly. Data poured in from seismographs, drones, gas sensors, and satellites. Each piece told a part of the story, but the whole picture was terrifying. Dr. Hayes created a map showing which areas were most at risk. Cities hundreds of miles away could be affected if the eruption escalated. By evening, the team noticed something chilling. A series of deep, low rumbles traveled across the caldera. These were not earthquakes. The sound came from underground, a growling, almost living noise. It vibrated through the instruments and even through the shoes of anyone standing on the ground. The scientists tried to explain it. Magma movement, some said. Rock fracturing, others guessed. But no one could stop thinking about what it might mean. The sound was growing louder each hour. By nightfall, it could be heard from the research station's windows. Meanwhile, the local residents began reporting strange phenomena. Water in their taps bubbled or smelled metallic. Pets refused to eat. A farmer found that his crops near the caldera's edge had wilted overnight. Even the river that ran through the valley seemed warmer than usual. Something in the ground was changing the life above it. Dr. Hayes walked along a ridge late that night. She shone her flashlight across the caldera. Steam rose from cracks, glowing faint red in the moonlight. The ground pulsed like a heartbeat. She felt the power of the earth beneath her feet, a living force that could not be controlled. She took a deep breath, realizing the scale of what they faced. "We are watching a monster wake," she said quietly. Her team gathered behind her, faces pale. Cameras, sensors, and laptops were ready. Every eye stared at the volcano, every mind calculating, every heart beating faster. Suddenly, a sharp tremor shook the ridge. Loose rocks tumbled down. The team grabbed each other for balance. A loud hiss came from a nearby steam vent, louder than anything they had heard before. Something underground was moving with immense force. Mark gasped. It's not just rising. It's shifting, he whispered. The thermal sensors showed a new pattern. Hot magma moved horizontally under the Earth, creating pressure in areas scientists had not predicted. The team knew what this meant. The eruption could happen in places they never expected. Roads, towns, rivers, and forests could all be at risk. The volcano was no longer just a mountain. It had become a dangerous, unpredictable force. Dr. Hayes looked at the data again. The pulsing, glowing magma, the gas readings, the earthquakes, they were signs that the real danger had only just begun. We can't hide from it, she said, shivering. We can't control it. We can only watch and hope. At that moment, a distant rumble rolled across the valley. It was deeper, louder, and more terrifying than anything before. The ground trembled underfoot. Steam shot higher from vents. Trees bent as if pushed by an invisible hand. Even the river surged strangely. And then it stopped. Silence fell. But it was a tense silence. One that made every scientist's stomach tighten. Something huge had moved underground. Something dangerous. Dr. Hayes knew one thing for sure. Yellowstone was no longer sleeping. And the hidden danger beneath it was growing, minute by minute. Yellowstone's unrest was no longer a secret. Scientists had spent weeks observing the volcano's strange behavior. Yet, despite alarms and data, most of the world remained unaware of the danger. Dr. Emily Hayes stared at the global monitoring screens in the research lab. On one screen, seismic activity spread across the park. On another, satellites revealed small ash clouds drifting northeast. And on a third, unusual readings of carbon dioxide and sulfur were creeping into the atmosphere, visible hundreds of miles away. People need to know, Dr. Hayes said. Her voice was tense. If we don't warn them, we could be too late. The problem was not lack of evidence. The problem was disbelief. Governments hesitated. They wanted certainty. They feared panic. Social media posts about strange steam vents and glowing cracks were dismissed as hoaxes or exaggerations. Even news stations treated the story lightly. Another earthquake, another volcano warning that would fade from memory. Meanwhile, nature refused to remain quiet. Animals continued to act strangely. Deer fled the valleys at night. Wolves howled at places where no one stood. Birds abandoned nests and flew in massive flocks, their cries echoing over the mountains. Scientists watched in disbelief. Nature itself seemed to be sending a warning. The rivers and streams of Yellowstone behaved oddly. Some ran hotter than usual. Tiny bubbles rose from the bottoms of lakes. Fish became lethargic, and some floated to the surface. Muddy areas appeared where the ground had been solid weeks before. Every anomaly was a clue, but few people noticed. Then came the earthquakes. Minor tremors were now frequent, appearing in patterns that no one could predict. Buildings in nearby towns shook for a few seconds, sometimes at night, sometimes during the day. People posted videos online, showing lamps swinging and dishes rattling. But the majority dismissed it as minor earthquakes, a common occurrence in the western United States. Dr. Hayes and her team knew better. Yellowstone was awakening. The magma chamber below was moving, shifting, growing. The low, pulsing rumbles that had started weeks ago now echoed across the region like a heartbeat. And that heartbeat was getting faster. Communication with the authorities became a race against time. Dr. Hayes drafted urgent reports, filled with data and predictions. She warned of possible eruptions that could affect towns, highways, and rivers. She explained the worst-case scenario. A supervolcanic eruption could cover states in ash, disrupt climate, and affect agriculture and life around the world. Most officials, however, reacted with caution or skepticism. We need more proof, one government scientist said during a video call. If we act too soon, people will panic unnecessarily. But the signs refused to wait. One morning, a small ash cloud drifted over a town 50 miles away. Residents noticed a faint layer of gray covering their cars and streets. Children coughed in the air. News stations reported it casually, almost jokingly. A little volcanic dust, one anchor said. But the scientists knew better. It was the first warning for millions of people. Yellowstone was no longer just a park. It was a brewing threat. Then came the weather anomalies. Clouds moved strangely, forming thick layers above the park. Winds carried steam and ash further than expected. Temperature patterns changed. Rivers swelled. Some streams boiled slightly, sending faint smoke into the sky. Scientists across the world noticed these unusual events. The data confirmed the growing intensity underground. Dr. Hayes and her team decided to alert the public directly. Social media campaigns, live updates, videos showing steam and ash, real-time seismic readings, they tried everything. But even these warnings were met with doubt. It's sensationalism, some online commenters said. Yellowstone has slept for thousands of years. It won't erupt now. Despite the skepticism, some people began to prepare. Families bought emergency kits. Campers evacuated the park. Nearby towns planned temporary shelters. Yet the majority remained unaware of the real danger. Meanwhile, Yellowstone's rumbles grew stronger. One afternoon, a deep vibration rolled through the caldera. Trees swayed as if blown by an invisible wind. Windows rattled miles away. Streams erupted briefly with bubbles and foam. Animals fled the area in panic. It was a terrifying demonstration of the power beneath the surface, a message from the earth itself. Mark, Dr. Hayes' assistant, recorded a video log. "This is no longer just a warning," he said, voice trembling. "This is evidence that something huge is building underground. If we don't act fast, people may not have time to escape. Yellowstone is speaking. And we must listen." The team continued monitoring the volcano day and night. Their sleep became irregular. Their eyes grew tired from constant screens. Every unusual reading made hearts race. Every tremor made their stomachs tighten. The volcano was no longer a distant threat. It was immediate. Then, strange new phenomena appeared. Geysers erupted far beyond their usual boundaries. Steam vents in areas previously dormant began hissing loudly. Tiny landslides occurred on ridges where the ground had never moved before. The park, normally a place of peace and wonder, now resembled a living, breathing warning system. As the world remained largely unaware, Dr. Hayes realized the stakes were global. Yellowstone was not a local threat anymore. The ash clouds, gases, and earthquakes could affect agriculture, transportation, and climate across the United States. The volcano was not just a sleeping giant, it was a ticking time bomb. Late one night, as the team gathered in the control room, the instruments picked up something new, a sharp, violent tremor that pulsed across the caldera. The monitors showed magma shifting horizontally in unexpected ways. New cracks appeared, and the pressure readings skyrocketed. Dr. Hayes held her breath. "It's starting to move faster," she said. "Much faster than we predicted." Mark stared at the data, pale. "Does this mean it could erupt soon?" Before Dr. Hayes could answer, a distant rumble echoed through the valley. It was deeper and louder than any previous sound. Windows in the lab rattled. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Steam rose violently from a vent outside, glowing red in the moonlight. The team exchanged glances. One thought crossed all their minds: the world may have ignored the warning, but Yellowstone was ready to make everyone pay attention. It started quietly, almost unnoticeable. Steam hissed from a vent in Yellowstone's caldera, glowing faintly red in the morning light. Dr. Emily Hayes watched the monitors with a mix of dread and fascination. The numbers spiked suddenly. Seismic activity surged. Ground deformation accelerated. "Something's happening," she whispered. Her team scrambled. Alerts rang in the control room. The magma, once slowly moving beneath the earth, had begun a rapid ascent. Heat and pressure built in ways they had never seen before. Outside, the park looked peaceful. Birds flew over calm rivers. Tourists wandered near geysers, oblivious. But deep below, molten rock surged, fracturing the earth from inside. A low rumble spread across the valley, vibrating through rocks, trees, and rivers. It was a sound no human could ignore. Then came the first visible eruption. Steam and ash burst from the vent like a geyser on steroids. The sound was deafening, a roaring exhale from the earth itself. Smoke twisted toward the sky, carrying ash that darkened the morning sun. Tourists screamed and ran, cameras dropped, phones forgotten. The ground shook beneath their feet. Dr. Hayes and her team rushed outside. The air smelled of sulfur, acrid and thick. Their eyes watered. Rocks tumbled from small cliffs nearby. Trees bent as if trying to escape the rising ash. The first eruption, though small compared to what the scientists feared, was still powerful enough to remind everyone of Yellowstone's true nature. The eruption lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough to send ash drifting over nearby towns. Residents looked up, confused and frightened. Cars were covered in gray dust. Children coughed. Animals fled into forests. Nature itself seemed to recoil from the volcano. Inside the park, the thermal sensors showed a terrifying pattern. The magma had opened new channels underground. Pressure was shifting unpredictably. Small fissures formed where none had existed. Steam vents along the caldera began spouting simultaneously. The first eruption was only a prelude. Mark filmed the eruption from a safe distance. His hands shook as he pointed the camera at the vent, capturing the glowing steam, the trembling trees, and the frantic tourists. "This is just the beginning," he said, voice trembling. "I don't know how bad it's going to get, but it's real. It's happening." The team reviewed satellite images. Ash clouds extended further than they had predicted. Tiny particles began drifting over forests, rivers, and towns. The scientists calculated the spread. Even though this eruption was minor, it affected a much larger area than anyone had imagined. Then came the tremors. Not just the normal rumbles, they were violent, jagged shocks that shook the valley unevenly. Buildings near the park trembled. Roads cracked. Bridges swayed. Even miles away, people felt the ground under their feet pulse and vibrate like a heartbeat gone wild. Dr. Hayes knew the worst was yet to come. Yellowstone had many vents. One small eruption here could trigger another elsewhere. The magma beneath the park had shifted, opened new paths, and now, every vent was unstable. The first eruption was a warning. The volcano was testing its power. Tourists were evacuated hastily. Helicopters circled above the park, carrying small groups to safety. Smoke and ash made visibility low, turning the sky gray and foreboding. Ground teams moved carefully, navigating cracks and small landslides caused by the shaking earth. Animals reacted instinctively. Elk ran down valleys, bison charged toward higher ground, and wolves howled from ridges. Even fish in rivers fled toward cooler, calmer water, leaving shallow pools behind. The natural world seemed to sense that the Earth's anger had just begun. Inside the lab, Dr. Hayes and her team monitored the data in horror. Thermal cameras showed magma shifting closer to the surface. Gas readings spiked dangerously. Pressure charts showed irregular, unpredictable surges. This first eruption, though minor, confirmed their worst fears. Yellowstone was active and growing stronger. Government agencies finally acknowledged the danger. Emergency alerts went out to towns and cities downwind. Highways were partially closed. National news ran live updates. But even now, many people struggled to grasp the scale of the threat. "It's just a small eruption," some said. "Nothing to worry about." Dr. Hayes knew better. She had studied Yellowstone for years. She had seen what even a minor eruption could do. Ash could cover towns, rivers could become blocked, and the climate could be affected if the volcano escalated. This eruption was a signal, the first sign of what could be catastrophic. Then something new appeared. Along the edges of the caldera, the ground began to bulge rapidly. Trees toppled. Rocks cracked. Steam vents erupted simultaneously, forming a curtain of smoke and ash around the park. The first eruption had triggered additional activity. The Earth was adjusting, spreading its energy outward, testing the limits of its own surface. Mark looked at Dr. Hayes, eyes wide. "It's bigger than we thought," he said. "The first eruption, it wasn't the start. It was just a warning." The team watched in tense silence. The volcano's power was visible now, not just in the charts but in the Earth itself. The glowing steam, the shaking trees, the ash drifting over towns, it all spoke of something larger, something terrifying, yet beautiful in its raw force. As night fell, the first eruption's ash cloud cast an eerie red glow across the park. The sky was filled with smoke and sparks from small fires caused by falling hot debris. Helicopters moved like fireflies over the dark landscape. In towns far away, people reported strange sunsets, orange skies, and thick, dusty air. Dr. Hayes reviewed the data once more. Every reading screamed the same thing: this eruption was only a prelude. The magma chamber below Yellowstone was vast, alive, and increasingly unstable. If another eruption followed, it could be orders of magnitude stronger. Outside, the volcano rumbled again. This time, deeper, louder, and longer. The earth shivered, rivers surged, and distant towns felt the vibrations. The first eruption had announced itself. The world could no longer ignore Yellowstone. The eruption that began quietly now announced itself loudly to the world. Yellowstone's first eruption had been just a warning, but the effects were spreading faster than anyone expected. Ash drifted over towns, thickening the air. Rivers carried sediments and heat, affecting wildlife downstream. Panic began to ripple through the region. Dr. Emily Hayes and her team worked tirelessly in the control room. Monitors displayed seismic data, satellite imagery, and gas readings. Each update showed that the volcano was growing more unpredictable. One vent erupted stronger than the first, sending a tower of ash hundreds of feet into the sky. Thermal cameras showed magma moving sideways beneath the surface, pushing new areas into danger. Nearby towns experienced the first real signs of chaos. Ash settled on streets and rooftops. Cars slowed as visibility dropped. Schools closed abruptly. Children covered their faces as the wind carried fine gray particles into every corner. The air smelled of sulfur and smoke. People coughed, their eyes watering. Those who had doubted the scientists now realized this was serious. Rivers, too, were affected. Steam rose from warmer waters. Fish surfaced in panic. Tributaries swelled with sediment and debris. Farmers discovered their crops wilting, poisoned by ash that drifted from the park. Roads were blocked by landslides caused by earthquakes from the shifting magma. Even highways miles away began to feel tremors. The wildlife reacted instinctively. Elk ran through towns, bison charged toward high ground, and wolves howled in patterns that chilled onlookers. Birds flew in massive flocks, their cries echoing through valleys. Nature was fleeing from a danger that humans could barely see. Air traffic faced major disruptions. Airports nearby grounded flights as ash clouds reduced visibility to nearly zero. Pilots reported strange turbulence over the park, as updrafts and heat created dangerous flying conditions. Scientists warned that the eruption could send ash higher into the atmosphere, affecting flights across states. The government mobilized emergency responses, but chaos moved faster than preparation. Evacuations were messy, with highways jammed by cars and trucks. Helicopters ferried residents from isolated areas, but smoke and ash made navigation difficult. In towns downwind, emergency shelters opened, but many people arrived too late, covered in gray dust from the drifting cloud. Dr. Hayes's team tried to track the volcano's new patterns. The magma movement was irregular, creating fissures where none had existed. Smaller eruptions popped up unexpectedly, sending steam, gas, and ash in all directions. The first eruption was no longer the main event, it was a trigger for growing chaos. In Yellowstone National Park, steam vents erupted violently. Hot mud splashed into nearby streams. Cracks in the ground widened as the earth bulged with molten pressure beneath. Trees were uprooted, and small fires started where rocks and ash ignited dry grass. The park's usual calm beauty turned into a surreal scene of danger and destruction. Media coverage intensified. News helicopters hovered above ash clouds, capturing footage of rivers steaming and trees bending under tremors. Residents posted videos online, showing cars abandoned in streets, rivers swollen, and animals running from smoke. For the first time, people far from the park began to grasp the scale of the disaster. Even with this awareness, many underestimated the threat. "It's just ash," some said. "It won't do much." But scientists knew the truth. Yellowstone's magma chamber was vast, and this was only the beginning. The volcano had already shown it could change landscapes, destroy towns, and affect climate if it escalated. In the research lab, Dr. Hayes's team studied the new eruptions. Thermal cameras revealed magma moving closer to the surface in unpredictable ways. Gas sensors detected spikes in carbon dioxide and sulfur. The pressure readings were unstable, making predictions difficult. Every new eruption seemed to test the limits of the caldera. Mark filmed the chaos outside. Smoke and ash drifted across the park, covering trees and rivers in gray. Tourists had fled, leaving empty campsites and abandoned cars. The wind carried hot particles into nearby forests, causing small fires. Wildlife ran in every direction. "This is worse than I thought," he said into the camera. "It's spreading fast, and the world might not be ready for what's coming next." The local population was terrified. Families packed their cars and fled. Emergency sirens wailed in towns. Roads were clogged with traffic. People wore masks to breathe, but ash particles were fine and pervasive. Schools and businesses closed. Hospitals prepared for patients with respiratory problems from inhaling ash. Meanwhile, rivers far from the park began to show unusual behavior. Water temperature rose. Debris from landslides and small eruptions caused blockages, leading to minor floods. Fish floated lifeless in some areas, while others fled upstream. Nature itself had become a warning system for humans who were still trying to understand the scale of the disaster. The first eruption had been a signal. The spreading chaos confirmed it. Yellowstone was far from finished. Each tremor, each fissure, each plume of ash was a message. The volcano was testing its strength, expanding its reach, and warning humans that survival depended on recognizing its power. By evening, the park was shrouded in smoke. Shadows stretched eerily through the ash-laden valleys. The glowing vents cast an orange-red light over the terrain. The trembling earth made walking dangerous, as cracks and small landslides appeared suddenly. Helicopters moved cautiously overhead, carrying scientists and stranded residents to safety. Dr. Hayes observed the unfolding events with grim determination. The chaos spreading across the park and nearby towns was only the beginning. Yellowstone's magma chamber remained vast and volatile. The first eruption had triggered a series of unpredictable events. Now, the challenge was clear: understand the volcano's behavior before it escalated into a disaster far larger than anyone had imagined. Then, late at night, a violent tremor rolled through the valley. Trees bent, as if in submission to the earth's power. Rivers surged. Steam vents exploded in fiery bursts. Ash rose higher than before. The chaos was growing, and Yellowstone's fury was far from spent. The ash from Yellowstone's eruptions stretched far beyond the park. Towns miles away woke to a gray sky, cars covered in dust, and the smell of sulfur in the air. Rivers carried hot sediments, and crops began wilting under a fine layer of ash. Panic spread faster than the smoke from the volcano itself. Governments scrambled to respond. Emergency alerts blared on phones, radio, and television. Roads were closed. Bridges were checked for damage from tremors. Helicopters and rescue teams were dispatched to evacuate towns closest to the park. Yet the chaos was immense. People were unprepared. Families packed quickly, leaving behind homes, pets, and memories. Dr. Emily Hayes and her team worked around the clock. Their eyes were bloodshot from watching the screens, monitoring seismic activity, and analyzing data. Each new eruption, each tremor, Each rising plume of ash made the situation more dangerous. They realized the first eruption was just the beginning. The volcano was far from finished. Air traffic was grounded for hundreds of miles. Pilots reported turbulence caused by updrafts and ash. Airports closed, stranding travelers. Emergency flights carried supplies and evacuated residents, but navigating through the thick smoke and ash cloud was nearly impossible. Visibility was low, and instruments struggled to read altitude and distance. Even the animals sensed the danger. Elk ran down valleys, bison charged toward high ground, and flocks of birds migrated chaotically. Fish fled upriver, and bears abandoned dens, moving unpredictably. Yellowstone was alive in a way humans could see and feel but could not fully understand. In the towns near the park, life came to a halt. Stores closed. Streets emptied. Emergency shelters overflowed. People wore masks to protect themselves from ash particles, but the thin protection barely helped. Some residents fell ill with respiratory problems. Others panicked, driving into the chaos rather than away from it. Meanwhile, global attention began to rise. News channels covered the eruptions extensively. Footage of steaming rivers, fleeing animals, and ash-covered towns went viral. Scientists were interviewed, explaining that Yellowstone was a supervolcano capable of catastrophic eruptions. Social media erupted with speculation, fear, and disbelief. Many ignored the warnings. Some compared it to ordinary volcanic activity, not realizing the scale. Inside the park, the volcano continued to show its growing power. New vents opened, sending glowing steam into the sky. Cracks widened in the ground. Trees bent and toppled. Small fires started where ash landed on dry grass. Rivers bubbled with hot water. Every natural system in the park reacted to the underground forces. Dr. Hayes and her team coordinated with government officials. Evacuation routes were prioritized. Schools, hospitals, and shelters were mapped to guide residents to safety. But the unpredictability of the volcano made planning nearly impossible. Fissures opened in unexpected places, and tremors sometimes blocked roads or destroyed bridges. Mark filmed the scene outside the lab. Ash drifted across the sky, turning the sun red and strange. Rivers near the park were steamy and turbulent. Wildlife ran in panic. Human activity was chaotic, with cars abandoned on highways and people helping each other through smoky streets. He spoke into the camera, "The world is waking up to Yellowstone. But are we too late?" The eruption continued to evolve. Lava pools formed in new vents, glowing brightly at night. Steam clouds rose hundreds of feet, spreading over nearby forests. Seismic activity reached dangerous levels, with the ground shaking unevenly, making every step outside a potential hazard. Scientists noticed strange new phenomena. Some geysers erupted without warning, hurling hot water and mud. Rivers swelled mysteriously, and underground pressure caused small landslides on ridges. The volcano was unpredictable, and its behavior seemed almost deliberate, testing every system around it. Governments extended evacuations farther from the park. Military units helped with logistics, carrying residents to safety and controlling traffic. Hospitals prepared for large numbers of patients with respiratory and trauma injuries. Yet despite the planning, chaos continued. Roads were clogged. Ash fell like snow, covering highways and towns. The volcano's influence was spreading faster than humans could respond. In the lab, Dr. Hayes observed the ash cloud rising higher and moving farther. Gas levels were climbing dangerously. The magma chamber beneath Yellowstone was massive and volatile. Every eruption, every tremor, every vent opening increased the risk of a larger, potentially catastrophic event. Outside, the world began to take notice. Satellite images showed a growing ash plume drifting across states. Weather patterns were affected. Air quality warnings went out. Schools and businesses far from the park closed. People finally realized that this was not a minor eruption. This was a warning of a supervolcano awakening. At night, the scene in Yellowstone became even more terrifying. Lava glowed from vents, ash fell in thick layers, and steam vents hissed violently. Trees swayed under the trembling ground. Rivers bubbled and overflowed in places, carrying ash and sediments. Helicopters moved cautiously, shining lights on roads and towns to guide residents. Dr. Hayes and her team stayed glued to their screens. They had seen eruptions before, but this was unlike anything in their careers. The volcano was alive, powerful, and unpredictable. The first eruption had triggered a series of events that were now growing exponentially. Mark whispered, "It's like the Earth is fighting back, and we're in the middle of it." Dr. Hayes nodded grimly. She knew the next eruption could be far larger. The ash, lava, and gas were only the beginning. Yellowstone was teaching the world a harsh lesson about nature's raw power. And the scientists could only watch, analyze, and hope that humanity could react in time. Then, the ground trembled violently. A massive vent erupted, sending glowing lava and ash hundreds of feet into the sky. Smoke spread, covering the moon and stars. Rivers bubbled and surged. Animals ran in every direction. The human response teams struggled to navigate the chaos. The eruption had escalated beyond prediction. Dr. Hayes's heart sank. The first eruption had been a warning. The chaos that had followed was only the beginning. Yellowstone was now fully awake. Night had fallen over Yellowstone, but the darkness offered no comfort. The sky glowed red from the erupting vents. Ash covered the valley like a heavy, gray blanket. Rivers bubbled, carrying hot sediments downstream. The ground trembled beneath every step. Dr. Emily Hayes and her team stood on a ridge, watching in horror and awe. The first eruptions had escalated into something far more dangerous. Lava poured from multiple vents, glowing like molten rivers carving through the earth. Steam rose violently, hissing as it collided with cooler air. The smell of sulfur and scorched earth was heavy and choking. "This is beyond anything we expected," Dr. Hayes said, voice tight with tension. "The magma chamber is fully active. Every vent is unstable. The next eruption, it could be catastrophic." Mark filmed from a safe distance, capturing the glowing lava, the ash drifting over forests, and the trembling trees. "It's alive," he whispered. "The earth itself is alive, and we're in its way." The ash cloud had spread hundreds of miles. Towns that had thought they were safe woke to gray skies, streets covered in dust, and a sulfuric stench in the air. People fled in panic, cars abandoned, masks over faces. Airplanes were grounded across states. Rivers overflowed in low-lying areas, carrying ash and debris. In the park, small fires started from the heat of falling ash and molten rock. Trees were toppled by tremors and violent wind currents caused by the eruption. Wildlife fled in chaos, elk, bison, wolves, and birds all moving instinctively away from the danger. Nature itself seemed to acknowledge the sheer power of the volcano. Seismic activity was unprecedented. Tremors traveled farther and faster than predicted. The earth groaned and shifted, opening new fissures. Lava erupted unpredictably, flowing over old paths and carving new ones. The ground bulged like a living creature, expanding as molten rock surged beneath it. Dr. Hayes's team monitored the activity from their lab. Thermal cameras showed magma approaching the surface in multiple locations. Gas levels spiked, with carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide clouds drifting across the valleys. Pressure readings fluctuated violently, making prediction almost impossible. "This is the full power of Yellowstone," Dr. Hayes said grimly. "We are witnessing a supervolcano unleashing itself." The first signs of the true eruption had begun with small vents, minor ash clouds, and rivers heating up. But now, it was a full-scale awakening. Lava fountains reached hundreds of feet into the air. The ash cloud darkened the sky over vast distances. Thunder rumbled within the cloud as molten rock and gas collided with air currents. Towns downwind struggled to cope. Streets were abandoned, and emergency shelters overflowed. People struggled to breathe through masks. Fires ignited in places far from the volcano due to hot ash. Hospitals treated patients for burns, smoke inhalation, and injuries from tremors and debris. The chaos was massive, unrelenting. Even the weather was affected. Winds carried ash higher into the atmosphere. Clouds formed unusually, blocking sunlight, turning days into eerie twilight. Temperatures fluctuated. Rivers flooded as snow melted faster due to rising heat from the earth. Entire regions began to feel the effects of the eruption. Dr. Hayes and her team calculated the impact. The eruption could affect hundreds of miles, with ash covering crops, rivers, and towns. If it continued, it could disrupt climate patterns across the continent. And yet, even with all their monitoring, they realized they could not fully predict the volcano's behavior. Yellowstone was a force beyond human control. Mark captured footage of glowing lava flowing through the park, steam rising from fissures, and animals fleeing. "It's beautiful," he said, voice trembling, "and terrifying. I've never seen anything like this. The Earth is showing its true power." The team realized that the first eruptions were only warnings. The chaos that spread afterward was only a prelude. Now, the true power of Yellowstone was on display, a violent, unpredictable force that reshaped landscapes and threatened everything in its path. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently. Trees bent, rocks cracked, and rivers surged with hot water and ash. A massive vent erupted in a towering column of lava and smoke. The force shook the ridge where Dr. Hayes and her team stood. They clung to each other as the earth pulsed beneath their feet. "This is it," Dr. Hayes said. "The real eruption has begun, and we may not be able to stop it." The ash cloud grew darker, denser, spreading faster than before. Visibility dropped to near zero. Helicopters struggled to navigate. Emergency response teams moved cautiously. Nature itself seemed to panic, with wildlife fleeing in every direction. The landscape was changing, reshaping itself under the volcano's force. Dr. Hayes realized that Yellowstone's eruption could have global consequences. Ash could block sunlight, affecting weather and agriculture. Rivers could flood, carrying ash and debris downstream. Entire ecosystems could collapse. This was no longer just a local disaster, it was a planetary event in the making. As the eruption continued, the team documented everything. Lava streams flowed unpredictably. Steam vents hissed violently. Trees fell. Rivers roared. The power of Yellowstone was overwhelming. Every moment brought new dangers, new surprises, new signs that the Earth was alive and reacting. Mark recorded the final footage for the team. "People need to see this," he said. "They need to understand what nature can do. Yellowstone is awake, and it's showing its true face." The night was filled with glowing lava, red clouds, ash falling like rain, and rivers steaming. Tremors shook the earth repeatedly. The volcano had gone beyond small eruptions and minor chaos. It was now a full-scale force, reshaping everything in its path. Dr. Hayes looked at the monitors one last time before stepping outside. The volcano had shown its first, second, and third levels of power. But the magma chamber was still active, still vast. The eruption was far from over. The world watched in awe and fear. The true power of Yellowstone had been unleashed. And everyone knew, this was only the beginning.